Hello, everyone. So today we're going to talk about why Thanos is such a good villain. Um, we've both seen um, we've both seen Infinity Wars and Endgame, the Avengers, and a lot of people have talked about why Thanos is such a good villain, but I feel like there's an innate difference between understanding him spiritually and philosophically than just understanding how he is written. Because a lot of people have gone over how he's written as a great villain, how to write great villains, just like the Joker as well, and in the new Batmans. But few people have tried to understand him in relation to certain philosophical ideals and also historical events. So my understanding of Thanos is that he is a ideological purist. Um, what I'd like to start with is the fact that at the end of Infinity Wars, what he does is go to this planet, and then he basically just becomes this kind of like sage farmer guy that just chilling by himself. He could have made a palace. He could have made countless servants. He could have made this whole world made out of gold and just lived on it in luxury. But instead, he chose to gather his own food. He chose to live in a small shack that didn't even have one of the walls were missing. And that shows that he was he was so invested in doing this one action that the rest of him, his willpower was just simple. All of his will was focused in this one act. What do you think about this before we go on?
Well, I think that he was definitely an ideological purist from what I remember. And I think that that shows extreme passion for the cause, obviously. And um, I mean, I don't know what you can go off
I
of
mean,
that.
so you know, he wasn't a happy guy. It was this None of what he did really was enjoyable for him. Um, ever since the death of his planet Titan, where everybody basically ran out of resources, from what they tell us, it just seems like he's it's haunted him, and he wants to make it the universe in a way that won't happen to the rest of the universe. So in that sense, he's compassionate. He doesn't want that to happen to everyone else, and he's not happy about what he does, but he feels like he has to.
Well, yeah, and I found it interesting that he gets this basically adopted daughter, right? And then he's willing to he connects with her emotionally, but then he's even willing to sacrifice her because he's so dedicated to the cause. So that which could have brought him some fulfillment and emotional connection, he still was so dedicated, you
I
know?
feel like the last vestige of his compassion died with Gamora in a way, and
Yeah.
it haunted him. We see that scene where I don't know what that realm is called that he went to after he did the snap, but the little girl Gamora, which is like, I guess, her purest form, because she'd always been that little girl. Everything that was added on after that was just what Thanos wanted to add on. So she's always been that little girl, and she stripped away what Thanos was because she tried to stop him. So she asked him, did you do it? He's like, yes. And when he says yes, you see that he is sad about it. He didn't enjoy it. And then, she asked, what did it cost? And he's like, everything. It cost me everything. And basically, when he says everything, I think he's talking about not only the universe, like a lot of people in the universe, but also Gamora. He had to give up that last vestige of himself in order to make this happen. Um,
Yeah.
so, like, do you think that Thanos has any historical parallels with somebody that really thinks that they're right and isn't happy about doing what they do, but they do it anyway because they feel like this is the only way things will will be balanced? Is there anything that you can think of historically, or like any person?
Well, before you said that I was going to bring up Hitler, but I don't think he fits what you just described. But I was going to say that he did a really similar thing with his partner where they both committed suicide in the bunker, but that's a slightly different. I mean, I don't think he regretted doing anything. Maybe he
That
did.
that's that that's an example of an ideological purist. Like, okay, well, I lost, so it's over. So, bam.
Yeah. hmm I'm trying to think of somebody in history. I'm sure if I thought long enough, I could think of somebody.
I
Um,
mean, like, we can think of people that aren't necessarily villains per se, but are ideological purists. Um, I would say that somebody like Sun Tzu in certain ways, like he knew how to fight. He had a great warrior philosophy. He knew what he had to put his people through, his soldiers through, in order to achieve an aim of basically solidifying the stability in the section of China that he was basically serving. So he was willing to do a lot of things that to his soldiers and to the people they were fighting in order to achieve this balance in the realm that he was in. Um, I would say that I hesitate to say somebody like Joseph Stalin or Adolf
Yeah.
Hitler, because I think Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler actually had way more ego than Thanos. Like, Thanos had an ego because he thought that he understood but other people didn't. But when it comes down to it, Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler thought so much of themselves they didn't seem to really care about the grander whole. So I don't think that they
Hmm.
fit the bill. Um, of course, Kim Jong Un, Kim Jong Il don't fit the bill either. Um, it would
Well, I
be
think that all they do, they're such ideological purists that they think that by holding fast to this idea, to this concept that they are, I mean, I think it takes a lot of ego to believe that you're going to totally change the world by sticking to this one concept at the cost of everything. I think Hitler definitely fits that. He thought that he was creating this like utopian type society with, he just had to sacrifice millions of people in order to have that really come
drawing
to.
upon drawing upon you know the deification of classical ideals. He thought everything classical was perfect back then, and it was people who started following Abraham were, and his idea of the Jews being mud people, which is ridiculous, of course. But I mean, he thought that that's where
Yeah.
we delineated. But the classical ideas of what a human being were, in ancient Greece, was what he thought as his guiding star. So I mean, yeah, definitely, I would say that they are similar in that regard. Um, what I
Yeah.
found what I found really interesting about what I found really interesting about Thanos is that, in Endgame, when he in Infinity Wars, he said, I know what it's like to believe with all that you have. That's I'm not quoting directly, but I know what it is like to believe that you're absolutely right but fail anyway. And then at the end of Endgame, when he's about to turn to ashes, he just sits down and he looks down. He accepts his fate. He's resigned to it, and he's basically saying, not only is it my end, but there's a sadness in his eye where he thinks it's actually the universe's end too, because that's going to come in his mind. And that sadness wasn't just for himself, but what he thought would happen. There's a lot of holes in, the Marvel universe, but
Yeah. Well, I automatically think of like how when the ego holds tight to a concept and then it eventually the concept doesn't work quite the way that the ego initially thinks, like eventually the ego has to reconcile the fact that the thing is not going to come to fruition, so it just like falls away. Like the egoic concept kind of just like dies, fades just like Thanos. That's what I thought when I was watching it. Was
do
like,
you
you know,
do you think that Thanos, when he was about to turn to ashes, do you think that he felt like was wrong after all, or do you think that, like I said, he felt like, oh well, this is my end, but also the universe's end? Which one do you think it is?
honestly, I would think that he would have thought both. I don't know what he would end on as he was like right about to die, but I think he was probably pondering whether all of the sacrifices he made, including his daughter, his adopted daughter, and all of that was worth it because he was about to die and he ended up losing in the end anyway. And then he probably was wondering like about the fate of the universe also. So I think he probably would have been just in contemplation as he was about to
Hmm.
die.
And something else that struck me, you know, one thing that was typical of, typical villains, henchmen, stuff like that we've had in the past is that all those who followed him seemed to completely buy into it, and they didn't care about themselves, but they were so awestruck by Thanos that, and I love how Marvel, even though they wrote Thanos so well, you still had a bunch of like creature-like things following Thanos that just didn't seem to have a mind, and they were just all like, "Rar!" Like, where did he get these things? First of all, but also, um, it's like you could have. I don't know. I felt like they could have written where there was like a bunch of intelligent soldiers without ones that were just like bestial. I mean, that was kind of like pulling back from the old comic book stuff, but
Well, I think it can go both ways. Like when it comes to like this dictators will tend to attract a lot of people that are not that intelligent, who are just like minions for them, who just do their bidding. I mean, yes, like, Hitler had a few very intelligent men. They were evil, but they were intelligent men that were helping to orchestrate the things that he did. But I mean, so
Joseph
I think,
Goebbels, Mengele, which, well, I guess you could call them kind of close,
yeah.
and the like, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think it makes sense that they would make the archetype of this headstrong dictator like monster dude, that he would have like, kind of brainless followers. Kind of makes sense.
Yeah. And what I thought was interesting is that Thanos thought that the universe would be grateful after he killed 50% of them. And you see the universe like well, everybody on Earth is just like basically in a state of depression. And I think that a lot of like really evil people, they think that after they've accomplished their aim, everybody will be like, "Hey, you were right after all." But that's not really what happened.
Yeah.
And Thanos kind of realized that in Endgame, where he's like, y'all weren't grateful, so I'll just create a whole new universe of people who will be grateful because I didn't remember what I did. It
Yeah.
was like
Yeah. What's the whole? Sorry, you go. No,
I was
you.
just gonna say
You.
it reminded me of it reminded me that like maybe it, for some reason when he was talking about how he's going to create a whole new universe, it made me think that he was like going to make his own Genesis, to where like nobody remember what he did, but everybody would be grateful because they were there.
Mhm.
So um, hypothetical, if Thanos had created another universe, um, he could have created something like Genesis that was passed down. So, I mean, I'm not saying the Abrahamic God is Thanos, but I mean, it's definitely a reflection of that story being passed down and how Thanos could have set himself up as a god like that, Yahweh.
Yeah, well, they say that history is written by the winners, not by the losers, so obviously that's totally true, and most likely would have been what happened. I mean, look at our history books. I mean, the conquerors are the people that write the history books and control everything, so definitely true. And who knows, maybe Yahweh was like some alien force or extraterrestrial, who knows?
We don't know. I mean, well, I don't know. I would say that on the spiritual side of things, I would say that Yahweh is a force, but I think it's a vaster force than the Abrahamic traditions understand. Because when you start to get into specificity of like I'm right, nobody else is right, you get back to the egoic little kid mentality, which
Yeah,
is actually thinking on it very similar to Thanos.
yeah.
Like that's going to offend a lot of people, but I mean,
Well, little
it
kids,
fits the bill. It
they
fits the
go
bill.
through a period from 3 to 5 when they kind of were like, me caveman, me hit things. They do that. They like, like babysitting, like, oh, here's this thing. Let me throw my truck across the room. Just
I do love watching babies, like when I'm in a checkout line and like somebody's holding a baby, they'll just look at the counter and it's like it looks cool, so they're just like hit hit hit. And so it's like I guess in a way I guess in a way Thanos.
well, Hashem is the name that most Jewish people would regard God as. Like, there's like 80 or 90 different names. You go to Elohim, Yahweh, there's like a bunch of different names. I can't go. Adonai, there's a bunch of them. And they all are different attributes because basically omnipresent, omniscient, like God, omnipotent God, like
Yeah.
you can't just name them with one name. So Yahweh is like, to me, whenever I hear Yahweh, the
No.
personification of ego. So I'm like, oh, okay, that's God's ego coming through in the Bible when I read it. So, yeah, and I think Thanos is very egoic. He's not love-based, he's more fear-based, obviously. So,
Yeah. And in a way, I feel like Thanos he's afraid of doing it, but he felt like he had to do it. because you feel this constant remorse from him. And even when he's completed the whole thing, you get this shadow of a smile that crosses his face. That's not even like a full smile. It's not like a Joker smile where it's just happy the whole time, where it's just like chaos. Oh, it's great. I love it. And it's like it's like half of a smile.
Once the ends justify the means, it's like that type of mentality. That's pretty much where he comes from. So
Reminds me of Dick Cheney every time I hear that. I don't know why. He's that kind of guy, I guess. Um, so another thing I want to talk about is when um, Doctor Strange, he held up a finger to Iron Man, and I think what he meant by that, because it was never really clarified, is that you know there only has to be one sacrifice, and that's you. That's what I think he meant when he held up one finger. And I think that in Infinity Wars, when he said, "I'm sorry, Tony, there's no other way," he was also talking about how Tony's gonna die. Like, he wasn't just referring to everybody being Ash for a little bit of time. He's also talking to Tony, saying, "I'm sorry, there's just no other way." And then when Doctor Strange held up the finger, he's like, "Now's the time. You have to sacrifice yourself." And Doctor Strange is, of course, like I said earlier when we were talking, I think that he's the character that made the biggest transformation, because he was somebody like Tony Stark, and then he became incredibly humble, and his personality really, really changed, and he became somebody that everybody can admire. I mean, well, I did anyway, but I mean, he's very resolute in his duty. He's humble, and he doesn't mess with people like Tony still does. He still has this, egoic mentality all the way through his movies, and it's just that always disgusted me. It was always really snarky, and I don't like that. I think Captain America was very bland.
yeah.
I mean, like, he's just the epitome of. He's just meant to be like the Superman of the Avengers. Like, he's always the same positivity level, and he's.
Well, that's because his original character was like a propaganda character from way back when. I mean, he developed into something more over the last few decades, but I mean, originally he was basically like this kind of propaganda character to
Yeah, I mean, that
get
makes
people
sense.
to see stuff.
I will say that not everybody liked the combination of David Banner and Hulk, but I actually thought it was really entertaining. I'm not sure if he's probably not as strong, but I'm not really sure. I'm not sure on that, but it was very
Yeah,
entertaining because he was trying to work himself up in one scene where he's just like, okay, Hulk smash, uh, uh. He's just hitting a car. He's just hitting something. He's like, oh, I'm trying to get angry, but it really wasn't.
yeah.
So and
I
Hulk's.
you like that like that they had the combination, or did you like it better when he was the Jekyll
I
Hyde? Like,
liked the combination, but from the lore, Hulk, just the more angry he gets, the more powerful he is. So if he can't get angrier and angrier in the form of Hulk, then that dampens his power quite a bit, in my
yeah.
opinion. Um,
I think it would have been a little cooler if they would have had him be like the hybrid. They just added a little bit more of that. I think it would have been cool. Yeah. It was
that makes sense.
interesting.
Yeah. Who have I not covered? I don't. I think that Hawkeye, he just went nuts, basically. He went full vigilante mode, full anti-hero mode when his family was gone. Um, I actually didn't know who they were talking about when they were referring to him, and then I didn't know who it was with the hood on when he was killing those Yakuza members. But then it made perfect sense, and I particularly enjoyed the fight where him and Black Widow were basically fighting this, trying to sacrifice themselves. I thought that was
Yeah.
a really good dynamic because you half expected one of them, like you half just expected them to turn on each other and then throw the other one off, but it was like
Yeah.
reversed because like that's what we usually get, but then it was like reversed, and you're just like, oh, they're actually like really good people that just want to they want to be the one that's sacrificed. But it made more
Yeah.
sense for Hawkeye to sacrifice, well, for Black Widow to sacrifice herself because Hawkeye had a family and she really didn't. So
Yeah.
it made more
Yeah.
sense.
That made perfect sense to me. I think it was an interesting dynamic that it was showing like two good people would be, just like you said, trying to save the other and then sacrifice themselves. I mean, that was a really interesting take on a concept, you know, because you see that in movies all the time where people are trying to kill each other off, and they did the exact. That was actually one of the highlights of the film for me. But I didn't like that they killed her. That was really sad to me, and I actually cried a little bit. But
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable. Um, I think in my head I've gotten down to who Thanos is like, and it may have to do with a historical fiction book that was written on this historical character. But I think that there's a lot of evidence to show that he was like this. Alexander the Great. Um, for
okay,
instance, for instance, you know, when Alexander the Great was besieging Tyre, it took him a long time. He felt this need in his daemon that he had to conquer as much as possible, and people would be better off for it. I mean, he's one of the few figures that we have a lot of information from because he had personal scribes. I'm not sure if he called them that, but when he was, I'll give you an example. When he was besieging Tyre, and it lasted months and months and months. It lasted too long. It held up his expedition. So he made an example out of them and crucified thousands of them. And there wasn't any feeling that he liked to do it, but he felt like he had to make an example. Like, if you're going to hold out this long, this is what I'm going to do to you. And in a way, Thanos was kind of doing that with Earth towards the end. That's what he was kind of thinking about. But Alexander the Great, he had no authority or reason to think that his rule would be any better than anybody else's. So Thanos had no reason to believe that his logic was supreme. So it's similar in that they're both similar in that regard. But um, you know, I think that's a thing with conquerors is that they think that because they have the power to do something and they can do it well and they have all these victories in a row, that they are preordained by the divine or heaven, whatever you want to call it, to basically win. And then when they stop winning, that's when that's when their world falls apart because that's Alexander the Great. He didn't have a contingency plan for if he died. So basically, his generals, the wars of succession are what happened. So
yeah.
Thanos, there's no other Thanos. He didn't have a contingency plan for if he died or if he, you know, what would happen um, if he just basically lost. That's why you see him resigning himself to death once he sits down and then turns to ash. I think that him and Alexander the Great had a lot of similarities, and Alexander the Great going to the other side of the world and seeing the ocean and crying. That's an old tale and all. I would like to note that Alexander the Great, he won some battles in India and he conquered a few kings. Well, a couple kings basically gave up to him, and then one king he fought really. He was a hard fighter, but he respected him because he was fighting, and he respected the guy, so he gave him back his kingdom and a couple other kingdoms. He admired how well he could fight and his commitment, and he was actually fighting himself. So in a way, Thanos admired Tony Stark in a very similar way. I don't know if anybody's made that comparison before because those are really weird combinations of things, but it's very similar. And by the way, I would like to make it plain and clear that Alexander the Great did not conquer barely any of India. It's constantly misconstrued that he conquered a large part of India or he just conquered India, but he did not. And it drives me nuts when people say that because he only conquered a tiny bit of India. There was a bunch of other kingdoms. He didn't even go anywhere near South India. And then the three crowned kings of South India. But anyway,
I
I don't know.
actually think he did conquer India, but that I didn't think that he did, but maybe that's because I remembered it correctly. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
yeah.
well, people say he conquered the known world. Well, the rest of India was kind of known, and he was aware of it. So he didn't conquer the known world. That doesn't make any sense. So,
Yeah.
like, I mean, like, it's not like he was just like, okay, well, India's these just three kingdoms. I guess the rest of the continent just drops off the earth.
Well,
Um,
he conquered. The main thing is like he conquered the enemies of Greece, who had been trying to take over Greece, so that, like, no matter
But he kept
what,
going. That where he messed up, where his ego took, and he kept going. And then there
yeah.
was no reason for him to invade India. Absolutely none. Except for the idea that a few hundred archers were sent to Persia to help them in their fight. But I mean, like, besides that, he had no reason. And regardless, is there anything you want to say before we end the video here, or any closing thoughts? I might have a couple.
Um, well, I was just gonna say that just like with like the Christian was it the Conquerors? I'm trying to remember the when they were doing the Knights Templar or whatever, when they were doing the Crusades, when you have like an ideology and then you have power, that's gonna be where like people start doing the conquering, and they have like they think they're predetermined by God or by a higher wisdom or a higher power of some sort, to do this big thing. And I mean, even if it's an atheist, like, Stalin or whatever, like they have this belief that they're destined to do this great thing that's going to help the world or whatever, the universe.
And when it comes to religion, if you lose, and like, okay, God is testing us, or it's the devil's fault. So I mean, you gotta contingency plan for even if you lose. So,
Yeah.
and then the thing about the Crusades is that well, you see this not just in religious groups, but also in like red communist groups, that the enemy is so wrong that we can do whatever we want to those who are part of the enemy.
Well,
So
it's
that was
still,
very much Thanos oriented too. Like, his soldiers could do whatever they wanted because they were on the wrong side of things.
it's duality consciousness. That's the thing. Whether it's religion or it's just an ideology that people are following, like just a belief system, like they can be an atheistic belief system. It's just still that they're following a belief system, and they 100% are devoting basically their life to. If somebody's willing to die for something, that's a very scary concept. I mean, even patriotism, like depending, it's fine, but if you're just willing to blindly die for patriotism, that's the thing. Like if invaders came in, I would totally die for my country to try and keep it a safe place. But I'm not going to go unless I'm 100% certain and just die in the name of patriotism, somewhere else.
I think there's a big difference between be willing to die for something than being willing to kill for something. Now, like, even if you have to kill in defense, that's a different thing. But if you're the aggressor and you're trying to die for something in that way, it's still kind of honorable because you're willing to die. But I think the greatest honor is when you're willing to die in defense, when a force is imposing upon you or your people. It's not about. It shouldn't be about offense in any way. It should be about pure defense. Um,
That's a good point. Yeah. And I guess that's kind of what I was saying, because if we had people invading here, I could die in the name of, saving my country or whatever, but that's still the defense. Like, I don't want to go on the offense anywhere.
you don't want to do preemptive strikes, in other words, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay, so we'll go ahead and end the video there. We kind of went out on a tangent because we're prone to do that since we both have some historical and spiritual knowledge. But if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you thought that this video about Thanos wasn't mainly about Thanos and that was troubling, or if you thought that we had a lot of good points, you didn't consider these things, please shoot them down in the comment section below. We would love to address those comments. We'd love to hear them. This has been a video about why is Thanos such a good villain? And we have some villains in the world that kind of match up, especially Alexander the Great, in my opinion. So, thank you very much for watching. We hope to see all of you on the channel in the future.